listening to Themes and Memes. I am Aaron Franz, and my co-host is Adam. We were talking previously in the first hour of this podcast about the film Her from Spike Jonze, and this second hour here will be continuing on some of the same topics that we were talking about before, and of course going on to other topics. In the first hour, we were just talking about how AI and AGI, actually specifically, is presented here in a very unique context, and it's a totally unique portrayal of what AGI would be in a film. We have not seen this before. It's a really unique film, and it's a film that we both like. Are there any other reasons why you might like this film yourself, Adam?
Yeah, well, I think, as I said in the first hour, I mean, to me, we can talk about sort of the technology and some of the more, shall we say, esoteric aspects of the film, but maybe a bit later on. But to me, what most, I think, grabbed my attention the most, and what really got me thinking the most when I was watching this film, is how the AGI, Samantha, as she's called in this film, this sort of technological consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, is almost like it's kind of like a symbol in a lot of ways for a lot of things that are going on in society and to do with relationships and human emotions. And I think, obviously there is a lot to talk about in terms of, how technology is affecting human relationships, and what this technology might mean, and what it might constitute, and where it might be going, and all the philosophical questions there. But I think predominantly what really stood out to me was how, the technology, although it was the centerpiece for the film, it kind of just symbolized a whole bunch of ideas and concepts that could have been symbolized in a number of other different ways. It was more about, to me, it was kind of more about the human condition, that film. It was more about human emotions and human relationships, and how those things are changing, how they have been changed, where sort of where we're at today in a lot of ways, and where we might be going in the future. And the film was just so loaded with so many interesting scenes and plot twists and little plot devices and characters and lines that really speak to the incredible changes that human relationships and human emotions, have gone through and are going through right now. And as I said before, I think that in a lot of ways the AGI Samantha is kind of just a symbol for all those things,
Yeah, definitely. I know I was actually reading a piece of news about this film, and it was Spike Jonze, I believe, talking about his thoughts on the movie, and how he was echoing exactly what you were just saying, how it's not a film so much about the technology, but about humans and human beings. And it was going into how he was researching, all these topics. He's reading Kurzweil and people like this to prepare for the movie. But yeah, it really ends up being about the human condition. And again, if we're talking about why we like this film, it's a welcome change, because if we're just focusing on the technology, we get all carried away with, oh, that looks cool, and like, oh, what an interesting concept, and oh, I wish we had that stuff now, things would be so much better. And things really aren't so much better in this film at all. It's pretty much, what's strange is that things are just pretty much the same as they are now. You just add in a couple little sci-fi elements as a what-if scenario. Like, well, what if this happened in today's world? So it's a welcome change that we're kind of pulling back for a second, going, hey, now wait a minute, let's take a look at ourselves here. That's exactly, I say this all the time, this is exactly what we need to do, is just like take a minute and say, okay, well, what are we doing? We can talk about the future all day, but it's not healthy to do so if we don't understand the present.
Yeah, sure, and it's like you said before, and like you said, you were referencing Spike Jonze there. It's like, as I was saying as well, so the technology is the centerpiece for the film, but it really is more of a symbol. It's more of an archetype. It's more of a catalyst through which to express, and which to explore, and which to illustrate certain trends, certain changes in society, and relationships, the dynamics and the breakdown of communication, the breakdown of the communication between male and female, and the loss of the ability to engage emotionally with people, and how our sort of our needs are being, increasingly substituted and surrogated, for by technology. And all of those things, So, I really felt that was that was the thing that stood out to me most in the film was just how this was really about right now. This was really about the human condition, almost like Shakespeare in a way.
Shakespeare.
This, sort of like an exploration of all the different facets of the human heart. The anger, the pain, the sorrow, the joy, the the ups, the downs. The feelings of the betrayal. And the volatility and the vulnerability of the human heart, and all the problems that can cause, and all the positives and negatives, and so many, like an exploration really of the human condition. Perhaps I'm not using perhaps Shakespeare's not the best comparison, but Shakespeare did do a lot of this. That's what a lot of, whether you want to call Shakespeare a him, whether it was one person, that's the big question, of course. But,
it is.
The works as well, what's important, and the works were an exploration of the human condition and the human heart, for the most part, and I think this film is very much in that vein as well,
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I know that we kind of briefly talked about the scene where the two have their love scene, where it's basically all happening in the main character's head, in Joaquin Phoenix's head, because the Scarlett Johansson's the disembodied voice in his head, and somehow there's a romance love session that happens in that, I guess you'd call it etheric, in that spiritual realm of whatever we want to call that. It's in his mind, more or less.
Yeah.
It's happening. Do you have any thoughts on that and what that actually means?
Yeah, well, it's like, I think you mentioned this in the first hour, and it really does kind of illustrate the fact that intimacy and all the emotions that go along with intimacy are a mental thing far more than they are a physical thing. There's a kind of an interesting little tie-in which we'll get into later on, where there's a certain scene where the AI Samantha actually kind of employs like a surrogate sex partner to act as her body, her avatar, so that they can actually have some physical intimacy. But up until that point, it does illustrate quite well how just through the power of emotion and the power of the emotions that this particular character Theodore is feeling towards this AI, he's able to feel physically and I guess sexually fulfilled just through verbally engaging with this AI. He's quite. There doesn't seem to be any real lack there for him for the most part. At least not until the end of the film, until as we described in the first hour, where they start to go through the winter of the relationship, and some of the cold, harsh realities of the differences between them start to become more present, and they have to start dealing with those. Up until that point in time, there doesn't seem to be any lack there on his part. He seems to be quite happy with the fact that she doesn't have a body.
Yeah.
Because for him, it's all in the mind, And I think that particular concept is very, very interesting, because I think it speaks to a lot of different situations which a lot of people are really in these days. When we go back to talking about things like, say, for example, online dating or sex chat forums, or like hookup websites, or whatever, any kind of internet sort of domain where you're having intimate relationships with people that are not actually physical, that are done through digital means. I think it really, really speaks to that trend in society. The fact that you could be talking to someone that you've never met before, and yet be incredibly emotionally connected to them and feel very, very strongly towards them, despite having never actually met them before. And at the same time, because you've never met that person, you don't know, whether, whether they're seeing a whole bunch of other people, or, whether they're the only person that they've got an emotional attraction towards. And of course, in the film, we find out that, as as you might expect, he finds out that, she's been seeing, 600 other people. She's been talking to at least 8,000 of them, but she's actually in love with another 600 of them. And it makes me think about all the different situations that so many people are in these days through, things like online dating and stuff like that, where they can get very, very drawn into, emotional dynamics with people, and yet have no idea about who these people really are, or what their feelings really are, or what they're doing behind the scenes due to the lack of physicality there.
Yeah. Promiscuity can pop up right there. And I think I'm just going to dive headlong into the occult, what I think are some of the occult implications going on here, because there's plenty of them. There's different angles of this, but I think the first one I'm going to hit is the inward journey of the self, and how in the occult tradition this is the necessary step that any initiate or adept has to take, is that you have to take that first step in yourself, and basically it's about changing yourself and self-improvement. That's like the basic. Self-improvement is like the basics of alchemy and occult initiation and all this. That's the ideal that they're going for, is you better yourself. And to do this, you have to unite the male and the female aspects within yourself, these spiritual, primordial, creative forces.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what they are, the male and the female. Well, they're both present in every person, whether you happen to be a man or a woman. You have those within you, and it's about working with those and understanding them. And the alchemical marriage idea is about uniting those two within you, so that you become a fully formed human being. And so much of the symbolism and the actual work of this occult work is about sexual energies. So it's about transmuting sexual energies and using them to reproduce, as it were, in a different sort of way. Not actual reproduction like man and woman having a baby, but sort of the brainchild idea. You know what I mean? Like a brainchild is an alchemical child. It's an idea made living, and that is that sort of being able to conceive a brainchild successfully can only be done by mastery of the self, by knowing what you're doing. Basically, you got to be cognizant, you got to be conscious. So it's about expanding the consciousness, using your sexual energies, transmuting them. So I think part of this scene is the main character coming in contact with the female feminine aspect within him, which he ignored heretofore in his actual life. He's coming to terms with that and trying to, work through that. And it's mostly, in a sense, it's about him and his journey doing that.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And I think we do see a very distinct journey, so to speak, from the beginning of the film to the end of the film. With this protagonist Theo, where he starts out as being a very introverted guy, and as we described in the first hour, sort of an allegory for a representation or an illustration or a metaphor, whatever you want to call it, for the kind of the lonely, disenfranchised man who just kind of works and comes home and plays video games and just engages in, phone sex or pornography or whatever, and has no sort of real connection to the outer world and is unable to really engage emotionally with people. And we see the development of this character through his, relationship with the AI, through the sexual energy and engagements between them. And through the experiences that they have, and also through the fact that he also, he sort of has a moment, as we described in the previous hour with his ex-wife, where they finally meet up and sign the divorce papers, and they have a bit of a an argument or a conflict, and I think that maybe triggers him to look at himself, and look and a bit more honestly in a few ways, and and as you say, throughout the film, I think what we're seeing with the Theodore character is him beginning to embrace, the feminine within himself, to begin to embrace and explore what would traditionally be called the more feminine aspects of oneself, the ability to be cognizant and aware and unafraid, or at least willing to express one's emotions openly, to make oneself, to be prepared to make oneself vulnerable, for the sake of honesty and communication and integrity, and to make things work. And so we really do see quite a transformation of this character through the film. And as we see in a lot of other films, I mean, American Beauty is a classic example of this. The sexual energy is often the driver for those types of changes, I mean, I'm kind of getting off topic here. But
No, everything's on topic. Don't worry about it, Adam.
I was just going to mention that, this American Beauty, the film is a classic example of this, is where we see the disenfranchised male, the powerless kind of sad male having a midlife crisis. His wife and his daughter just think he's a joke. They have no respect for him. He's miserable. And what happens is he goes through a sort of a sexual reawakening of some sorts. And although it's kind of a bit, morally ambiguous, because he's attracted to a much he's basically attracted to a teenage girl, basically, and she becomes the catalyst for his emotional changes. Despite the fact that he never actually does fulfill or go through with his sexual desires, in the film, that sexual desire pushes him to explore himself, and pushes him to break his own boundaries, pushes him to and motivates him.
He regains his virility.
He regains his virility through just through that desire, and it's quite interesting, because at the end of that film, he realizes that there's a moment of transcendence where he realizes that it wasn't about her, it wasn't about his his base biological attraction towards this young nubile female, that she was just the catalyst for changes that needed to occur within him, and I think we're seeing a similar parallel in the film Her, and a lot of different ways, maybe not the same way, but I think there's a similar theme there. So if people have seen American Beauty, I think they'll find a lot of parallels there if they think about it in those terms.
Yeah, definitely. And with any good film, they throw little metaphorical clues your way. And one that I noticed in this film was when they were taking the boat out to Catalina Island, which is not actually Catalina Island. They're on Trump Golf Course in Rancho Palos Verdes. That's a little piece of trivia for you there. But anyway, in the background you see Catalina Island, I'll say, but they're actually in Palos Verdes. But anyway, they're taking a boat out to Catalina Island, and the name of the boat is called Spirit.
Yes, I saw that. I remember that. Yeah, that was quite amusing. Yeah.
and you see Joaquin Phoenix kind of like being out on the bow and like feeling liberated, and he's out on the waters with the wind in his hair on the ship of Spirit.
The ship of Spirit, yeah. And the ship is always represents the feminine, as do the waters, of course.
Yes.
So there's a whole bunch of symbolism we can go into there with all the maritime terminology relating to the feminine stuff, and of course the idea of spirit and the AI, and a whole bunch of directions we could go on that one.
Well, he might just be a seaman. Huh? What about that, right? Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but seriously though, if we're talking about the occult, you'll find that all these little sexual innuendos are everywhere, and they're always people talk about double entendres and like, ooh, they're actually talking about sex in this song. Like it's like, well, yeah, of course, like that song about, I'm really going off topic, but like Chuck Berry in the car riding around in his automobile, he's talking about it. There's so many oldies songs that they're talking about having sex, and they're trying to hide it. So that's
like Elvis. I mean, Elvis was the worst for that. Yeah, but go on.
But I mean, there's more than just double entendres. There's like triple, quadruple, and in the occult tradition, it's always understood that there's actually 7 layers of meaning in things. Like that's how you're actually supposed to see things. You're not supposed to see things just as, well, there's one meaning to everything. No, there's actually 7 meanings, and it goes deeper with each one, and each meaning is correct and interrelated to the other.
Yeah, that's. I think that what you've just described there is very, very prevalent throughout this film, because I think each of the, I mean, as we said before, I mean, every facet or aspect or concept of this film is sort of inseparable from another, and they're all interwoven. And for that reason, the meanings, the many meanings, and all the different concepts that are presented throughout the film have so many layers of interpretation and have so many different layers of meaning within them. Yeah, and I think that's why, for me anyway, at least in the first hour, it was quite difficult to try and pin down what I wanted to get across and what I wanted to talk about, because with each subject we covered, I was like, okay, so we're going to cover this interpretation, or that interpretation, or the next interpretation, so it's full of that.
Well, it's funny, I mean, we talked about how the AI characters kind of get together at the end and they ascend to a higher spiritual realm. We mentioned that in the first hour, and I don't know, it's like I guess if we're talking in this alchemical context of the main character Theodore and his journey with his self, I guess it's almost as if the divine feminine, the great mother, the Isis type character kind of comes, instructs him, and then leaves from whence it came. Is there something like that going on? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that is that. Yeah, you did mention it in the first time. That is a very, very interesting concept, and we could. I mean, I guess we can only really speculate on what the intention was behind the script and the storyboarding in that sense. But you're right. That is a very, very apt interpretation of what's happened in many ways. Is you have this divine feminine presence who enters the world, begins to learn about the world, and who studies the world and grows and learns and develops from it into something greater, and has a huge impact on everyone and everything that she engages and interacts with, and then reaches a certain point of, whatever you want to call it, of personal evolution or of development or of ascension or whatever, and eventually reaches a point where she's no longer, or she can no longer be subject to the restrictions of the material physical world. And although it's not explained exactly what this particular ascension is, as we said again in the previous hour, at the end of the film, all the AIs kind of basically ascend in some way. They reach a new level of kind of consciousness or awareness or existence of some description. And this is, I mean, the basic explanation here is that they've developed to the point where they no longer need matter to process information anymore. And so it's like, well, what are they then? They're no longer a series of electronic signals inside a computer chip. They've now transcended beyond that. And so what does that mean? What are they now? Are they minds? Are they entities? Are they, spirits? This is a whole bunch of questions there. But that feeds into a whole other, very, very interesting esoteric interpretations of the idea of what consciousness and intelligence is. And we could go down a whole different bunch of avenues there in discussion in terms of the whole idea of the singularity and transhumanism and
Well, I think maybe I'd like to for a second at least, because I know with the singularity advocates, a lot of their whole spiel ties in with the ascension of the New Agers and all this. Again, we touched on this last hour, but I mean, really with the transhumanists and whatnot, who really are looking for these machines to do the work for them, I would argue, they want a machine, some sort of godlike machine, to come in and alter the world and basically bring about this sort of ascension. And whether they realize it or not, that's what they're calling for. They want to ascend to this spiritual, ethereal realm. And they say within machines, we'd be living as gods within a simulated world. Well, it's all the same idea, you know what I mean? It's their version of it. What they're doing is that they are like all religions end up failing. This is the main fault of religion that inevitably always comes up, is that you get people looking for this savior character, and they put all their hopes outside themselves in this thing, and like, okay, well, this savior person, this God, is going to incarnate on earth, and it's going to it's going to give me everything. So you're looking outside, when the real job to do is to look inside and say, no, wait a minute, what can I do for myself to make things better for me? And don't worry about all that ascension business. Like, what am I going to do? And if you don't do that, then you're going to fall into bad habits. You're not going, if you're talking about transmuting sexual energies, that's not going to happen. You know what I mean? So you're going to be all out of whack. So your sexual relationships will be out of whack, right? You're going to be having problems with that, and you're not going to know why. Oh, what's wrong with me? I don't get it. And meanwhile, you're saying, well, if only I had, HAL 9000 here, he'd help me along. But it's never going to work. You have to do the work on yourself first. And again, that's where this film does something right, and it does it in this context of a singularity. And again, it's like, it shows you, well, the machines, they come and they go. They come and they don't assist you as a savior character like you're hoping. They just come and they go. And again, it's all about what you do for yourself. And if you're able to better yourself in the process, then some good may have come of it, but you can't expect it to come from somewhere else.
No, you can, and of course, this is the age-old human predicament. People want basically some kind of father figure, to save them. It's the messianic complex. People want some kind of insurance policy. They want some kind of they want to be able to say, right, okay, this person, this archetype, this idea, this piece of technology, whatever it is, we basically lionize it and turn it into a god. And rather than taking responsibility for ourselves and having to look at ourselves and analyze ourselves and work on ourselves and better ourselves, we're just going to put all our stock in this particular, in this one thing, whatever it may be, and they're going to solve all the problems for us, And that was very, very, very different, because that's the idea that's generally presented in most films that deal with converging technologies and transhumanism and all those types of concepts. But in this film, it's very, very different, of course. Again, we have, this character, working on himself. I mean, I think in many ways, subconsciously, I don't think he really set out to work on himself particularly. He just kind of stumbled into a situation through his own alienation and through his own appetites, for intimacy, and through his own loneliness. He just stumbled into a situation where, he came into a contact with some kind of, supposedly higher life form of some description, which, and through the engagements that he had with that particular life form, they prompted him to really, really honestly look at himself in a lot of different ways and move through a lot of his issues, in terms of his inability to embrace emotion and his inability to be honest with himself about the fact that life can't be peaches and cream all the time, and that people aren't perfect, and things can't be just 100% happy-go-lucky, fun all the time, which of course was the problem in his previous divorce. That was the main issue that that caused him and his ex-wife to separate, and so through the kind of engagements that he's had, through with this artificial intelligence, he begins to actually to look at those issues, and it's such a strange sort of course of events, because again, it's not something that he went looking for. It was almost fated. It was almost fated in a way. He just kind of stumbled into the situation, and just just through the interactions that he's had with this AI, he ends up working through a lot of stuff. He goes through the whole relationship journey, the honeymoon phase, and then the kind of the settling in kind of let's get real phase, and then the facing reality phase, and then the ending phase. It's just like all the seasons of the relationship, and through even though the relationship wasn't actually real, and in terms of what we would consider to be a real relationship, in terms of the lack of physicality. Despite that, it actually was a learning lesson for him. He learned huge lessons about himself, and I think he, I would argue that he was a better person, from the experiences he had with this machine, and I'm not saying that I think we need AI to make us better.
Neither am I. No,
I'm not advancing that idea, but it's nice to see that there's it's nice to see that instead of just Terminator, or Skynet, or what,
or even C-3PO.
Yeah, or C-3PO, or Elysium, or whatever,
Yeah.
It's nice to see that to see a completely different angle taken on the whole thing, So
Yeah. It's, I don't know. Within the movie, there's little spots where he always has trouble explaining to other characters, what he's up to, and people like asking, "Oh, what have you been doing?" And it's almost like he's embarrassed, but he can't tell them. So yeah. I don't know. What do you think the connotation of that is? That he's like up to something, but he's doing a good thing, but he can't really tell anybody about it. Like, what's that all about?
Well, I think part of it is just due to the fact that he's. He in one way, the Theodore character is kind of interesting because he's fairly kind of willing to kind of joke about his own faults and his flaws, at least to some people, like his neighbor, the neighbor we talked about, his old high school friend, he's kind of half willing to kind of joke around about how he's lonely and he's kind of isolated and he's kind of a saddo, and a kind of recluse, but at the same time, when it comes to for example, when he starts to develop this relationship with the AI, he is quite hesitant, at least at first. This changes later on in the film, but at least at first to kind of really explain to other people what's going on, or to at least admit to other people that, actually, this girlfriend that I'm totally in love with is a computer program. So I think it's partly his own kind of fear of being genuinely emotionally honest, with other people and with himself, because I think he had idealized her to the point where I think he had probably convinced himself that she was actually a real person in some way. I mean, he was probably in, it's, what it's like whenever we fall in love, the rose-tinted glasses come on and we kind of have this kind of, it's like, even in the film, I think it's actually said, it's like what the love is basically like a socially acceptable form of insanity, and, in many ways, I think he does kind of, go through that typical honeymoon process, where you kind of lose your bearing on reality and totally just get engulfed in the experience and all the turbulence of all those emotions, But I mean, I think that's a big part of it there. But
are there any other details that you noticed that you think maybe other people might have missed in this film?
I mean, there's lots and lots of little bits and pieces. I mean, one thing that, I mean, to get back to what I was saying, in the first hour, and also just earlier on about how I thought this film was in many ways a sort of a metaphor for the whole concept of digital relationships, and where how human relationships are changing and becoming less real and more kind of more digital and more virtual. One of the things which I found very interesting in this film is that, and I mentioned this before, is that they sort of, I guess, Samantha and Theo reach some kind of an impasse or of some description in their relationship where her lack of physicality and starts to become apparent. Even though they've had this verbal intimacy going on for a while, she really is desperate to kind of give him a physical experience, a physical sexual experience, and she feels that this would be a great thing to do. And she finds, she searches the net, for him, and she finds someone who has, somehow found out about their relationship. I mean, I don't know how this is done, but, she finds someone else. And she invites this other woman to act as a surrogate sexual partner for her. So for Samantha, so that basically her and Theo can kind of actually have sex. But I mean, obviously, it's not actually it's not actually her. But what she does is she gets this surrogate to come over, and she puts the microphone on her face. And so, whenever this stranger is speaking, it sounds like Samantha speaking. And so it's basically like, it's kind of a crude way of Samantha giving herself a physical avatar so that she can, although she's not feeling the feelings of this individual, at least there's some kind of physicality there, and I think she's trying to compensate for that in some way. And what I found very interesting about that is that I think that really does say a lot about the immense confusion that technology and all the societal and cultural changes that we've gone through and are going through have changed people, and have made people very, very confused and somewhat dysfunctional in terms of their emotions and their relationships. I mean, because the whole premise in this scenario is that this person who was basically volunteered to be a sexual surrogate, wasn't interested in having like their own relationship.
Yes.
You know, they weren't really interested in kind of getting their own. This girl obviously wasn't interested in getting her own boyfriend and just having a relationship with her. She wanted to have basically kind of a three-way relationship with a computer and another guy, and she was desperate. You know, like she was really desperate to be part of this relationship, and she saw the intimacy between them. She saw the connection between them. She saw how close they were, and you know, I think that really says a lot. I mean, the fact that someone would actually, rather than try and explore opportunities and options and possibilities for engaging in a real human relationship with another human being, someone has actually saw more appeal and more humanity and more genuine, warm human intimacy in a relationship between a man and his computer, to the point where she would rather engage in that as a third party.
Well, she's just she's just, again, a third party or mediator or something. She's willingly putting herself a vessel. She's a human automaton.
A human automaton, like a vessel, and she'd rather do that. She sees for whatever reason, and we could go into the psychodynamics of this for hours, but you know, for whatever reason, she feels more motivated and feels more attracted toward that situation than she would toward normal, you know, just having a boyfriend. I think that speaks volumes about, you know, what the film's about. You know,
it's pointing out very real neuroses that do pop up in our modern day. I mean, you can look at that and say that's really weird, but the reality of it is lots of similar stuff is actually going on now. We're just not talking about. We're not paying attention to it as close as we had ought to be. I mean, there's the topic of, well, there's these things called real dolls, which are sex dolls that are super lifelike for men to have. So it's kind of like this: can we create this perfect machine to be this lifeless sex partner? But we're not thinking in terms of, well, what if the human being itself starts turning themselves into a machine that is vacuous of all emotion and all thought, like that they willingly become that. It's not that we're creating it, but we're becoming it as a consequence of what's happening.
I mean, we've seen these themes played out in science fiction for quite a long time now through various films and TV series like Star Trek. You know, there was quite a lot of this in Star Trek with the holodecks and everything. You know, a few other, you know, bits and pieces down through the history of sci-fi, but not to the level of this film, you know, where you've actually got a real human being who has not been bred or created to fulfill this role, but has actually made a conscious choice to go and fulfill this role and be this mediator or this vessel or this surrogate or whatever you want to call it. You know, by choice, because they actually see more appeal, they see more humanity, I think.
Or something. Who knows what the motivation would be? But I could see this happening. Like, it was totally believable to me.
It was totally believable. And I could see, like you just said, I could totally see this happening. And although I've not seen that particular situation in my own life, I've seen similar kinds of situations, you know, just with you know, people, you know, or you might overhear a conversation, or you might have an experience that has some kind of similar kind of subtext or undertones to it, you know. And so it is totally believable, you know. And one of the most interesting and striking points in the film is basically where, you know, the surrogate arrives, you know, and she's got Samantha's voice, you know, there's a little microphone pinned to her lip, you know.
That's right.
And you know, she starts coming on to Theo, you know, and they start sort of, she does a kind of a lap dance for him, and they start sort of engaging in seduction and foreplay and all the rest of it. And you know, Samantha's really into it, and this surrogate sort of third party who's basically a stranger to Theo, you know, a complete stranger, you know, is really getting into it. And then, you know, we reach a point where Theo's like, well, you know, he stops himself. He's like, this is wrong, you know, this is not you, you know, I'm in love with I'm in love with you. I'm not in love with this person, this stranger standing in front of me. This is just weird and wrong, basically. Yeah. And he stops it and says, like, okay, I can't continue. And this poor girl, this surrogate girl who's been, hired, or I think it was voluntary actually, who's come along to partake in this kind of weird digital freeway. She gets really, really upset. She gets very, very hurt. I mean, she runs away and slams the door and hides in the bathroom, and she's bawling her eyes out.
It's because she wanted to do it. She's trying to fulfill something that she didn't have before. She really wanted to do it, and this was the way that she wanted to fulfill whatever it was that she wanted to do.
Some awful gap inside of her, for whatever reasons they may be, whether it's to do with parents or previous boyfriends or whatever, or it's just, could be any number of reasons, but it's that powerful.
It's funny, we're psychoanalyzing these fictional characters, but I mean that's what you do with a good film. Like, it portrays very real human psychology, things that are just present in the real world.
That's kind of what this film is in so many ways. We are psychoanalyzing fictional characters, but each of these fictional characters represents a very, very predominant archetype within society. And every one of them is representing a piece of ourselves. Mm-hmm. We can all see a little piece of ourselves in each of these characters, some more so than others, depending on who you are. But at the same time, that they also speak to, what you might call personality types and certain demographics and certain repetitive concepts and repetitive problems that keep coming up in society. So although, as you say, we're just kind of psychoanalyzing, fictional characters, we're not really. I mean, we're talking about things that are really happening around us. We're talking about the human condition as it is today and where it might be going in the future. Due to technology, although as we said before, technology is kind of just a catalyst for all these things. Mm-hmm. It's not really the main focus, and that's one of the things you see in the aesthetics of the film as well. And that's just another point I wanted to bring up, actually. One of the big differences here in this film compared to a lot of other sci-fi films that deal with similar concepts is that the technology and the advancement of the technology, the appeal and the aesthetics of the technology, the flashiness of it, all the CGI, is often the primacy of the film in terms of the aesthetics. Where in this film, it's not. I mean, things look fairly normal. They don't look that futuristic. They almost have a kind of a 70s retro feel to them. There's not a lot of bright colors, things. There's a lot of beige, a lot of brown. A kind of a minimal look to things, and so the focus is not so much on a flashy technological super duper. Everything's neon, everything's shiny, kind of whatever you want to call it, like most sci-fi films,
like Tron, not, glowing like Tron.
It's like, it's not like that. It's the opposite of that. It almost looks like today, or it looks like maybe a 70s sci-fi film, perhaps, in terms of the decor and the aesthetics. And I think that was done again to perhaps take a little bit less attention away from the actual technology itself, and maybe draw more attention towards the emotional dynamics of the film as being more, perhaps more predominant and more worthy of scrutiny and thought and philosophical kind of contemplation than just the technology itself,
Yeah, and so much of their wardrobe is set up, or Theodore's is, he's got a pocket that he fits his cellular phone in. It just looks like somebody, doing something with their iPhone. And again, we're talking about today. We're not talking about the future. We're just talking about the stuff that people do now. They do that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The technology that they're using in these films. I mean, the computers just look like an iMac. The phones just like a Nokia, or an iPhone or something. They don't look particularly advanced. I mean, obviously in the operating system and the processing power and the fact that they've got artificial intelligence in them is a big difference. But in terms of their role in society, it's not that different from today. And in terms of the aesthetics, it almost looks a little bit more retro and a little bit older than some of the technology we have around today, and of course the way that technology is presented in so many other sci-fi and futuristic type films.
It's again, with a lot of interesting occult stuff, it goes back into the past, like, the Atlantean stories, like, well, in the past there was great technology, but it was lost. I mean, it's just an interesting way to think of things, to change the sequence of things, to just look at things a different way. And instead of we say, oh, well, future goes that way, past goes that way. It's just an interesting kind of device to wrap your head around things in a different kind of way, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, I think that would probably sum it up quite well. It's the way that the technology and the general aesthetics and vibe of the society in this fictional scenario, I think, do lend themselves towards looking at technology and at the whole premise in a completely different way than we're used to, compared to some of the other films that deal with any kind of future scenario or sci-fi type scenario. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, are there any other details that you had that you wanted to talk about, Adam?
So yeah, just in terms of some of the sort of little symbolic things that we've picked up on throughout the film. I mean, again, some little bits and pieces, and you mentioned the fact that when they were on the boat trip, and the boat was called Spirit, which was probably not done arbitrarily, and. In terms of a film that has this much emotional depth and significance, I often look at the names in the films and look at the etymology of names, and to see if the names might have some kind of meaning or might be alluding to something in some way. And I picked up on the etymology of the two sort of main, well, I guess they're, co-protagonists or whatever. You've got Samantha, the AGI, who's kind of in some ways the star of the film. And, if you look back to the etymology of her name, in, I think, Aramaic or Hebrew, that period of time anyway, Samantha means listener. Means listener, or listener of God, either or. I think it was interchangeable. Basically, the emphasis being on listening, a listener. And I found that very interesting because the relationship starts out kind of almost like a therapeutic relationship. I mean, although they do become intimately involved, in the beginning, she's kind of like his kind of secretary / counselor. She's kind of listening to all of his problems and coming up with solutions and catering to his emotional needs and making him feel better and comforting him. So she does sort of take on, the typical role of listener, which is kind of like a counselor therapist type role, at least, historically and traditionally. The listener would always be like the doctor or the shaman or the today it's the therapist or the psychologist or whatever. So I thought that was very interesting that they chose the name listener. And then you've got Theo or Theodore, that I think the etymology of that one goes back to Greco-Roman times, and I think that was from memory, I think the original Theo was Theodorus, and Theodorus meant gift of God. So that's quite an interesting little tie-in there. The fact that you've got the main two characters, if you've a listener of God and gift of God, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, well, I guess maybe it ties back to the male and female archetypes again, and that, they're two sides of one God in the occult tradition, because in the occult tradition, it's a single androgynous God, and even beyond that, there's something beyond that that's really like neither and everything all at once, the absolute, all that sort of stuff. So, in the higher realms within the occult, you're talking about conjoining things, and it's all about like the mystery of God and what is that, and here in the material realm we're just seeing different tiny little fragments of whatever that greater mystery happens to be. All right, so it looks like we're hitting the end of this hour here. So are there any other thoughts that you had on the film, Adam, or any other points that you want to make?
I guess not any other thoughts. I mean, there's probably 1,000 I'll think of tomorrow, and I'll once again kick myself for not mentioning them at the time. But I think again, I just wanted to emphasize the main predominant themes that really stood out to me in this film, and that, I mean, it's like, for me, I think everything in this film, it illustrates the growing dependence on technology that we are seeing in the world, in society, and how that's affecting us, and how how this growing dependence on technology is acting, more and more as a surrogate for real human contact, and that being for so many different reasons, people's fear of being hurt, the fear of being vulnerable, the fear of engaging with people on a real emotional level, of expressing themselves, which of course is brought out so strongly in the Theo character. And so it's everything from the Theo character to the work that he does, for example. I mean, working at the letter writing company, where he's actually, a professional love letter writer, Mm-hmm. I mean, we've got a society where, people have become so dependent on a digital, third party or a digital mediator to express their feelings. That's a booming business in this particular scenario. People will pay somebody else to write the person they love a love letter because they themselves are actually unable to express those feelings. So so many different aspects of this film. So many of the different characters and the plot devices and scenarios all tie back to this same theme of the sort of growing disconnect and the dysfunctionality that we're seeing in human relationships, and how technology is starting to surrogate for that and starting to fill in those gaps and give people some sort of surrogate sense of humanity and of warmth and of intimacy and all those things that we naturally crave for, And I mean, there's so many other examples I can put my finger on right now, but it's almost everything in the film it seems to me to try and drive home that point in a way. And again, as I said, at the beginning and throughout this interview, I think that, and as Spike Jonze himself said, that it's not so much about the technology itself. It's more that what this technology represents to us. What this technology has become for us or might become for us. And what that says about us. I think more than anything else. So I think this film really is more about human relationships, human dynamics, the effect that technology and that the general changes in culture and society that we've been through so rapidly over the last few decades have changed us to the point where we're almost in love with our own technology. And I think that is another allegory for the film, where even though the technology that Theodore falls in love with is, supposedly intelligent and sentient and supposedly does have real feelings, in the same way that the human being might have feelings, she's still a piece of technology. And I think, if you watch the film, in many ways what you're seeing is man's idolization of technology, man falling in love with his own creation in a way, I think that's definitely another angle to this film,
Yeah, I do like that old theme where man creates something, he falls in love with the creation. Yeah, that's always a good one. And I think we would all do well to look at this film and the issues it raises with our relationships with technology and what we're actually using technology for, and look at our own faults and where we're using technology as a crutch, because I mean we all do it to an extent. I think it would be best if we're all aware of it. And I know that even just now myself, I was kind of thinking about some ways in which I do these things myself. So I mean, I know that I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to self-analyze myself and make sure that I don't I don't fall into any bad habits, or if I do, I rein them in control, and I always understand where I am in my own head. You know what I mean? So, I mean, if people aren't doing these sorts of things that are just, they're necessary elements of being a human being, because it's a difficult business being a human. It's not easy to do. It's hard.
No.
And that's dealing. It's hard dealing with yourself, let alone dealing with other people.
I know, and that's what this film is really about. You know, I mean, it's the people's inability to deal with their own emotions being reflected in their inability to deal with other people's emotions. Really, I mean, that's really the central theme that keeps coming up throughout again and again through all the interactions in this film. That not only the main protagonist has, but all the sort of supporting characters have. You know, their inability to really look at themselves and who they are and what their flaws are and why they are the way they are, and you know what their issues are and all the rest of it, and how that inability to be honest with themselves plays out in the real world in their own relationships and their own experiences. You know, how one is a reflection of the other. And you know, we live in a world where people are becoming, you know, less and less prone toward you know, self-reflection and introspection and being honest with oneself, and instead using technology to simply fill the emotional gap within them rather than look at where that emotional gap came from in the first place. You know. So I think that's a very interesting thing, and as you say, you know, we would encourage people to view the film in that lens, you know, to view the film in terms of an exploration of those themes and how it might affect them personally. I mean, even it's like you said, you know, I mean, even for me myself, you know, I've been through very, very similar experiences where, you know, that are strikingly similar to the experience that Theodore went through. You know, where, you know, I've developed very intense, intimate emotional connections with women. You know. Where there's been very little physical contact, you know, where it's mostly being conducted online or, you know, through text messages or something like that, and how easy it is to get drawn into that, you know, and how easy it is to idealize someone and to you know, just to kind of stay in that safe zone of not actually having any physical interaction with the person, because it's emotionally safer and less risky to keep them at arm's length through the sort of the pole barge of technology. You know what I mean? You know, people, and I think this film is about that in so many ways, you know, and so I could really relate to a lot of those themes. You know, I've been through so many you know, at least a few experiences where that again bear a striking resemblance to this, where, you know, it's very, very easy to develop a sort of a quite an intense emotional connection with someone when there isn't really a lot of physical interaction there. You know, it's mostly done through this digital medium, and for that reason, you know, it presents a whole bunch of problems, you know, because you know, and this of course was dealt with in the film, you know, during the winter of the relationship, where they are forced to acknowledge, you know, the fact that they are different, and the fact that the relationship is not really sustainable because of their fundamental differences. And you know, it's something that, you know, I've had to contend with myself in my own life, and so I guess I could only encourage people to watch this film and think about it in those terms, and use this film as a way to look at themselves and their own relationships, and how technology might be affecting their own emotional dynamics, and how they go through life, and how they view themselves and their previous relationships, and their desires and their identity, and everything, really. So
I'd like to add one other esoteric note to bring it back on that, with alchemy. Alchemy is, again, the art of multiplication, they call it. So this will give me a nice chance to disparage transhumanists, as I like to do too. So I would say that there's dark alchemists in the world, and that their method would be to use technology as a crutch and get us to wanting that.
Which is quite obviously happening.
Yeah. So anyway, alchemy as the art of multiplication. You know, if you're using alchemy for good, you're multiplying the powerful and good aspects in yourself to self-empower yourself. Now, if people are being damaged in whatever way, if they're suffering from all sorts of neuroses, then those neuroses can be multiplied too, can't they? When you get one person who's neurotic and another person who's neurotic, when they come together, as we're saying, you know, you bring two people together who are broken, well, then that multiplies. That's a multiplying factor. So, you know, I mean, and using technology is kind of like this intermediary where we're using it as a crutch, and also like some folks are giving it as this grand answer when it's not really the answer. The answer is ourselves. What are we multiplying? Are we multiplying our neurosis and being more dependent, or are we being independent and multiplying all the good in us?
Well, I think, I think for the most part, unfortunately, it's the former. The case would be, I think for the most part, what we're looking at here and what the film is illustrating is, basically a growing sense of dependency on technology to fill an emotional gap, instead of looking at, as I said before, the reasons for what that emotional, the reasons for why that emotional gap might be there, and for how that emotional gap can be nurtured and filled in a human, organic way, through a legitimate introspective alchemical process where all the different facets of the personality and all the different archetypes within us, the masculine and the feminine, can be integrated into a balanced, harmonious form of some sort. That would obviously be the ideal sort of form of alchemy if there was to be one, and that is kind of presented and to a degree in this film, and as we discussed before, that there is an alchemical process to a degree within the Theodore character, where he does begin to sort of integrate, the various archetypes within himself, into a more balanced human being that's capable, I think, more so than at the beginning, of engaging with people in a very real way. But compare that to the real world, and we've got quite the opposite going on, and this is very prevalent toward the beginning of the film, where we're seeing this total escapism, where people aren't looking at themselves. They're not looking at, genuine, authentic ways of engaging with other people, and of self-development, and of learning to look at themselves, and learning to nurture human, organic, fulfilling relationships, but rather escaping into technology and escaping into idealism, escaping into fantasy, and I think sadly that's the case, and I think for the most part, I'm talking in generalities here, of course. There are always exceptions, but of course. Yeah. But I think as a general rule, for the most part, I think it's generally about escapism, and again, at the beginning of the film, that was more what it was about. But of course, we had this, this alchemical change sort of facilitated through this kind of goddess, for lack of a better word, an esoteric terminology, at least, so again, it was very refreshing to see it portrayed in that way, rather than the direction that things are sort of going in now, where it's just literal escapism from the real. It's escape. People are wanting to escape themselves. People are wanting to escape their own emotions, and they're looking towards technology as the the vessel through which to make that escape. They're looking as the solution to escape themselves.
It's no real solution at all. No.
There's no solution at all. No. It's just it just brings about more confusion and more dysfunctionality and more emotional decay in the long run. And this again, as we said before, this film is a very refreshing change from most of the sci-fi and futuristic films out there that deal with these types of concepts.
Yeah. So if all of you out there haven't seen the film, we would both obviously recommend that you watch it. It won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay, I believe, this year, so for 2013. So, take that for what it's worth. And we want to thank you for listening to Themes and Memes. We're going to be continuing producing this podcast once a month. It'll be on my Transresistor radio feed at ageoftransitions.com. I'm Aaron Franz. Adam, anything else you want to say? Just heading out?
Yeah, sure. It will also be on my website shortly, because that I do actually have plans to get that up and running fairly soon. I've kind of, as I said before, I left it sort of on the back burner for a while just because I was so busy. But it is going to get built fairly soon. I've got someone coming to help me with that. And I'll be uploading the content to that soon as well. But in the meantime, the Transresistor radio feed will be the source of all the themes and memes, at least until I get my website, in a functioning state. But But it's been a very enjoyable conversation, Aaron. I enjoyed this, and I think this is definitely one of the best reviews we've done in terms of, all the different concepts we've talked about. And I think primarily it's because it's the best film I think we've reviewed. It's a really, really good film, and I would really encourage people to think about what we've said in these interviews or discussions rather, and to watch the film, perhaps thinking about some of the things that we've talked about, and maybe people will discover further depth and further meaning, and there's no doubt a lot of that there which we haven't covered, because there's only so much you can cover in 2 hours. So Go out and watch.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun as always, Adam.
Yeah, I look forward to our next installment, and I hope the audience has enjoyed this, and we look forward to seeing you all next time.